Our 2.6 objective, students will be able to graph quadratics in both vertex and quadratic form. Alright, so mainly what we're going to go over is we're going to go over how to graph a quadratic using its key features, meaning the roots, axis, symmetry, and vertex. So what I want you guys to do first is to go back to the 2.6 video and simply copy down all the information from example 1, practice 1, example 2, practice 2, because we're using the exact same functions from those problems to graph them. So go get that information that we already solved for in the last video, or the last notes, plug that in here, and then come back and pause or unpause the video to see how to graph with that information. So go ahead and do that now. Okay, hopefully you've copied down all the information from the last page of notes. Before we go through and graph with all these parts, I want to remind you of something, that even if you forget how to find the roots or the axis, symmetry, or the vertex, you can still always graph a function. You just start by making a t-chart. Let me just explain what that would look like real quick for the example number 1. We're not going to actually graph with the t-chart, but if I wanted to, I could make a t-chart and just pick some values. So here's my graph. I could pick like a -5, -1, 0, +1, and maybe +5. These are my x values, and these are going to be my f of x values, or my y values. How do I find the y values? I just picked random points on the graph. So I got like a -5, -1, 0. I just picked some points spread around the graph that I thought would be easy to evaluate. And then I just plug them into the function. So I just want to remind you, like I could plug in a -5 here. That'd be 25. Then a -10 is 15. -8 is 7. So I could plug in, and then I'd get -5, 7. I could plug in a -1. -1 squared is 1. -2 minus 8, that's -9. And we actually already have that point here. It's going to be our vertex. I could plug in a 0. 0 would give me -8. I could plug in a +1. +1 would give me 1 plus 2 is 3. Minus 8 is -5. And finally, I could plug in a +5. 5 squared is 25. Plus 10 is 35. Minus 8 is 27. And then I can literally just graph these points. Just plot these points anywhere on the graph. And then together, you would see a parabola. So you can always do that. Always, always, always. However, that just takes a while. And doesn't give us all the information we may need to answer all the questions they may give us. So I just want to point that out before we keep going, that you can always make a t-chart, generate by just plugging in the values for x and seeing what you get for f of x. Okay, that being said, this video is to show you how to graph with the key features. So let's go to that. So here's the first one. This one's pretty straightforward. It says that I have roots at -4 and 2. So let's just put those on here in red. I'm going to just leave the graph exactly how it is. However, every box here, every scale represent 1. So there's -4 and there's 2. Those are my roots. And then let's do my axis of symmetry in a red dotted line. They say that's at x equals -1. Well, here's the x-axis here, and this is x equals -1. So this is the axis of symmetry here. Okay, so that means that my vertex is actually going to be on here. I found my vertex earlier. It's -1, -9, so let's put that in blue. Okay, so now I have my roots and my vertex, and I can go ahead and just sketch a graph here. It's going to look something like this. It's going to go down, and it's going to curve around right at that point and go back up. Now I know the rest of these points aren't perfect, but I just want to point out, now if I go back and I plug in any of these points, they should show up on my graph. Now I know my sketch wasn't perfect, but let's just see. -5, 7. -5, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So that looks like it would have shown up on my graph. About there, if I was a little bit better drawer. -1, -9 did show up on my graph. It's right there, it's my vertex. 0, -8, that showed up on my graph right there. And 527, I'm sure that would show up on my graph. If my graph went that big, it'd be way up here. So my point is that all of these points will show up on the same graph. These key features just help us do it a lot easier. So if we know the key features, it's easy, but we don't necessarily need that to graph. So let's try another one here on practice number 1. The only thing that I'm going to do differently here is I'm actually going to scale these lines. What do I mean by that? Well, I'm going to change what each one of these lines represent because my graph is only 10, 10, 10, 10, and this is saying I'm going to have a vertex at negative 25 and roots at 12. So I'm going to change a couple things to kind of make it a little bit easier. One of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to make all these lines worth 5. So, for example, I'm going to make this negative 10, negative 20, negative 30. That's just my y values. For my x values, because it says that my roots are at 2 and 12, well, I could put a 2 here, but then 12 would be off the graph. So to make it a little bit easier, I'm just going to make all of these worth 2. So I'll show you how I do with that. I could say this is 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16. Okay? So now I've defined the graph a little bit. So now it's going to be easier for me to graph these. Again, let's do the roots in red. So here's the 2 root and here's the 12 root. Let's do the axis of symmetry, which is in 7, so it'd be going right down the center of this line here. I know I'm not good at drawing a perfect straight line, but there's my axis of symmetry, going right at x equals 7. And then my vertex would be at 7, negative 25. Let's do that in blue. That's going to be right there. I got all the parts I need to sketch a graph here now. Just curve it down, and there we go. My parabola is going to look something like that. I do want to point something out. Notice that there's not a negative in front of either of these x squareds. It's actually a positive value in front of the x squared. And you'll see that the graph opens up. In this next one, there is a negative in front of what will be our x squared if we were to put this in standard form. But there's a negative in front of the square, the x square specifically. So this one's actually going to open down. Okay, so we'll see how that works itself out here as we plot all the parts. So again, let's figure out how we're going to scale it. I see some big numbers here, 36. So I think I'm going to make the y's, every y line 5 again. And this time I'm going to go up 10, 20, 30, 40. I went up because this is a positive 36. I could go down as well, but it doesn't really matter. It's not going to be too important on my graph. I think that's all I'm going to change. I'm going to leave the left to right, or the x values, the same, so this is just going to be 1, 2, 3. If I'm not changing it, I don't really have to label it, but I can. I could go through and say, hey, this is 1, and this is 2, and this is 3, and so on. So now let's plot the points. Well, let's do my roots in red again. So here's negative 1, and then 11 would be slightly off the graph, and that's okay if I'm just 1 off the graph. I could just kind of put a 1 out, one away on the edge of the graph. So there's my roots. And the vertex is at, let's do the axis of symmetry first. It's at 5. So we could just go over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's right on this line. So there's an axis of symmetry going straight up and down at x equals 5. And then now we can go ahead and put in the vertex. It's at 5, positive 36, so that's about right here. My graph can't graph 36 perfectly, but I can get really close. And now I can just sketch a graph. Notice that this parabola is pointing down. It opens down, or it's upside down, you could say. And that's because it has a negative sign out in front. An easy way to remember this is that when the leading value is positive, then the graph is happy, so it looks like a smiley face. When it's negative, it's sad, so it looks like a frowny face, I guess you could say. So just a quick little way to help you understand what the graph should look like. Let's go to the next one. Notice this one is positive out in front, so we can see it's going to be a smiley face. And let's talk about how we're going to graph this thing. Seeing how I have a bunch of halves and they're relatively small numbers, I think what I could do is I can make all of my x value lines a half. So this would be like negative 1, negative 2, negative 3, and negative 4. So this would be 1, and this would be 2, and this would be 3. Okay, the y values, I don't think I'm going to change the y value too much because it's a 12.25, and actually that should be a negative 12.25. So it will go off my graph a little bit, but you know what? I'm okay with that because it's just going to go off, you know, a couple blocks, so it's okay. I could change it so these are all, this is like 2, 4, 6, 8, so it'll all fit, but I'm okay with it how it is. So let's go ahead and graph the roots. I'm going to do it in red again. So negative 4.5 would be right here, and positive 2.5 would be right here. And my axis of symmetry is that x equals -1. And my my vertex is at -1, 12.25. So let's do that in blue. I'm just going to show you real quick that I could just kind of extend my y-axis and kind of just draw on a couple of reference lines here, approximately the same distance as they are before. And so -12.25 would be just about here. And it's okay that it's not perfect as long as I label it all. And this is all clearly 1 because I didn't change the label. But if I wanted to, I could just, so we're all clear, I could say like, hey, look, this is -5. This is -10, so therefore this is -12. And now I have all the parts I need to sketch a graph here. So I'm going to go down, hit my vertex, and actually I should have curved up just a little bit here. And there you go. My parabola is going to look something like that. So all I did is use those parts, graph them, and then use it to kind of predict what the parabola would look like. Again, my graphs, my actual lines don't look perfect because I'm not a great artist, but I do have them going through the key points. That's important, and they should be fairly balanced over the axis of symmetry. So that's all there is to it. Hope that helps. We'll play with this more in class. See you guys on the next video.